what I needed to believe, and I wouldn't listen to him. So you know what happened next? Doug was gone.
Doug got fired or what?
Doug got fired.
Your dad fired Doug?
My dad fired Doug to prove me a lesson.
Oh, shit. But okay, so at that point though, when you're a young kid, and I've heard a couple interviews with you when you've talked about how your dad pushed you to, it wasn't just about the driving, your dad pushed you to get into the mechanics of the car.
Yep.
So like, you know, how did that play out in the garage? Like, how did it go from, like, how do you become a tinkerer and an engineer and not just a guy who likes turning left real hard?
Just exactly how I did it the hard way. I wouldn't listen to him. You know, you look at it, I looked at it at the time like, you know what, he did this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's different today. When I started racing with a guy named Doug Slocum. And to me, when I started racing, he was the God, because that's who I had to believe was God to get in the car every night. He told me what I needed to do. I believed in his adjustments and all these things. And my father seen that I took so much direction from him and he wanted me to have more involvement. He wanted me to understand what the car was doing rather than always rely on someone else to be able to do it. And I remember the day very distinctly when he tried to tell me that I needed to get involved in it more and understand how the car worked, and I told him no. And he said, well, what are you going to do when Doug's not around? You know, and Doug was in his mid-60s. And I didn't think that way.
And how
you know
old
what I mean?
you?
That's what adults do. Adults think
Right.
that way. They think down the road.
Right.
But a kid that's 15 years old doesn't think that way. He thinks off the end of his nose.
Right.
So when I said, well, where's Doug going? And he couldn't make me believe what I needed to believe, and I wouldn't listen to him. So you know what happened next? Doug was gone.
Doug got fired or what?
Doug got fired.
Your dad fired Doug?
My dad fired Doug to prove me a lesson.
Oh, shit. How pissed were you at your dad?
I seriously debated whether I really wanted to race that bad.
And how old are you?
I was 15 years old, 16 years old.
And you've been racing for 5 years?
No, I'd only been racing for a year.
But this is what
I've
I'm
been racing
talking about.
go-karts.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I've
You
been
started racing
sprint
when
cars at 15
so
or
like
14.
that's the thing. That's really young for a sprint car driver.
Absolutely, at the
right?
time it was.
Well, like so that Kenny Woodruff, I think he told a story. I heard a story on a podcast about how when you were a young driver, you're driving back with him, and he was talking to maybe another crew chief or some
Daryl Saucier on the telephone. Yeah, one of his good friends.
and said something about you know, keeping the butterflies up or something like that. Like, which does that mean something to do with the throttle?
Yep.
And
I can tell you the story.
Yeah, tell me the story.
So anybody that knows Kenny Woodruff, Kenny was really hard on drivers. If you didn't go out on the racetrack and he couldn't hear the motor singing louder than anybody else's, you were going to hear it. If you weren't driving by guys, you were going to hear it. He was hired by a group of people to push their drivers. And
so do some drivers not?
Look, there's a time and a place for it, but sometimes you have to be. A driver can be like I am today. I feel like I push when I need to.
Okay.
And that's patience. It's being smart, trying to save your equipment. But then there's guys that want to push their guy all the time, and they feel like their guys never give them 100%, so they sit and push them.
Right.
And that's how Kenny was. And he was really rough and gruff about it, and he wasn't scared if you come in and you made a mistake or you did something wrong, he'd tell you. It was more than tell you. He'd pretty much let you have it. And we had some good success in racing. The first time me and him raced together, we won second at the Knoxville Nationals. So we had a pretty good thing going there, and so we decided to race for quite a while. And I remember we were having issues getting qualified and all these things. And he had good friends. Daryl Saucier was his good friend. Daryl made fuel pumps. We run their fuel pumps. And Ron Shaver was his good friend, and he made the engines. And Jack Elam was his friend, and he did the cars. So every night you race, he'd talk to each one of these guys on the phone and kind of have a debrief, tell them what was going on. And I remember the night we left Devil's Bowl, and we were terrible. And I was dejected, and I was riding up in the top bunk of the truck with him, and we were going back to his shop in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and he thought I was sleeping, but there wasn't no way I was sleeping. And he was on the phone with Daryl Saucier, and Daryl was a lot like Kenny. There was never a driver that gassed it hard enough. And when I mean the butterflies vertical, that meant that it was wide open no matter what.
Okay.
So I heard him, we all had flip phones back then. So they were really noisy. You could hear these things throughout the whole truck, and all I heard Daryl say was, well, what do you expect when the butterflies ain't vertical? And all Kenny said was, Daryl, go fuck yourself. He's got the gas pedal shoved through the fucking floor pan, and he hung up on him.
Okay.
Pardon my French, but that's exactly what was said.
He had your back.
He had my back, but the funny part was, Kenny never had anybody's back. He never, ever would tell a driver that he had their back. He did not want him to know it. He always had a driver's back, but he would never let him know it. I just got privy to, he thought I was sleeping.
Right.
So that kind of was a game changer for me. Like, I always thought he was just a hard ass and rough and gruff, but at the end of the day, it told me that he believed in me, and he was trying to help me be better.